Om Jnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahabadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tushe Namaha Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. And also just one final housekeeping thing that I forgot to mention. So I'm back in Sydney. So because of that, for those of us who are in Sydney, after this module, at the beginning of the next module, we're going to start, I just need to talk to Ganesham Prabhu to arrange it, but we're going to do like a mixed delivery. So if you want, I mean, if you want, which I think some people expressed interest in, we'll be running these in person as well as doing them on Zoom. So don't worry if you're in Brisbane or Melbourne, like we'll still be offering a Zoom. We won't be expecting you to do the drive, but yeah, we'll be doing a mixed delivery. But yeah, just let me know if that's yeah, about your preferences regarding that. But yeah, so we'll be starting that from module 2. So I'm just putting that all on your radar. Okay then. So yeah, sorry about not being there last week. I was just, as I've mentioned, I was moving to Sydney, but always, I think it's probably, you probably hope I'd be moving again quickly to have another lesson taught by Abhishek Prabhu. Who can tell me what Abhishek Prabhu went over last week? Who was there? I'll pick out a name if no one volunteers. Tarun Prabhu, what did Abhishek Prabhu go over last week?
Prabhu, last week we went over the section 1 of the chapter 5. I think we did up to shloka.
Is Prabhu speaking? Can anyone hear? Oh, I'm having problems with my audio still. I have no idea what's going wrong. Give me half a second.
Yes, Prabhu, we can hear him.
Prabhu, would you like to speak again?
Yes, Prabhu.
Oh, now I can hear, yeah.
Prabhu, first is section 1 of the chapter 5. We did the 7 shlokas, I believe.
Yes, we did verses 1 to 7.
1 to 7 we did.
Yeah. And we spoke about Jnana Yoga. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that's very good. We spoke about all of those things. Who can tell me? I know Abhishek Prabhu really likes to stress the distinction between the 3rd chapter and the 5th chapter and how those flow on. Who can tell me how chapter 5 fits into the flow of the Gita so far? Did anyone note that down? I haven't had time to watch Abhishek Prabhu's lesson, but I know he always emphasizes that. Mrugank Prabhu, did you get any of that down?
I don't remember him talking about that specifically, but also like he started talking about chapter 5 like after 12 o'clock. So I left at that point. So maybe if he spoke about that.
Oh, so it was a bit of okay, so it was primarily yoga ladder up until then.
Yeah, we discussed the last part of chapter 4, and we discussed like the duty part of chapter 4 as well.
Yeah. Okay, so then yeah, so you transitioned then into chapter 5. As we know, chapter 4, it concludes on the question of knowledge, right? And so in chapter 5, we find this continues. Chapter 5 is really an intensification of chapter 3. I think you could say they are distinct by the fact that having it pass through chapter 4, we are now directly pertaining to questions of knowledge. Just because I don't want to revise over what Prabhu went over, I will start from text 7. My understanding is he did the first 6 texts. But essentially what's happened is we finished chapter 4, and chapter 4 has established all of these means of knowledge. However, Krishna still seems to be somewhat contradictory in Arjuna's eyes. Arjuna still is struggling to get the distinction between renunciation and action, right? You are telling me to act and you're telling me not to act, right? Arjuna, he is wondering, right? Renunciation and action to him seem to be contrary things. They are contradictory. They cannot exist in the same framework, right? And so within this confusion, Arjuna, he has expressed his doubt. And then, of course, Krishna, he directly answers it by going into much more depth, right, than he had before regarding these topics. Chapter 5, I find, is rather interesting in the sense that it's almost, I would say, a summary, if you will, of what we've been discussing for the majority of these first few sections. I also want to give everyone a heads up. Once we finish chapter 5, we've really finished the most difficult parts of the whole Bhakti-śāstrī course. We start off with the more complex things. From here on in, it's relatively straightforward. It's bhakti, 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 right? That's basically it from here on in. So, so this, in a way, it acts as a summary of what's come before. Of course, it is adding extra information, but chapter 5 really does hit a lot of the things we've been discussing so far. And so the first 6 sections, they're discussing again that relationship of renunciation and action, right? Karma yoga and sannyas, how those two relate. And of course, the concept that I've been discussing the whole time, which is when we hear karma, we should hear jnana. When we hear work, we should hear renunciation, because those two go hand in hand, right? And we will discuss more of that as we go along. So today's going to be relatively, actually, to come to Srinivas Prabhu's point, today is a bit of revision, right? Because this chapter very much does touch on the previous points. Okay, so we will begin going ahead. Are there any questions about the connections of the chapters or anything before we just dive into it? Because I'm going to go relatively quick today. We've got 27 texts in the chapter, and I'm just going to do all of them. If there's no questions, we'll go ahead then. Okay, so Mrugank Prabhu, would you like to share, or are you having issues with flooding? I hope you're staying safe, by the way.
Thank you.
We'll go to text 7. Okay, yoga yukto vishuddhatma vijitatma jitendriya sarva bhutatma bhutatma kurvanapi na lipyate. Maybe we could have Vignaraj. Would you like to read out the English?
Yep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So one who works in devotion, who is a pure soul and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled.
Yes. So here we find Krishna, he's now discussing, in general, we could say texts 7 to 16, they're really talking, actually I would say 7 to 12. 7 to 12 are really discussing what is the nature of Nishkama Karma Yoga, right? How does the Yoga Yukta, how does he behave, right? What are his characteristics? Okay, what are the characteristics of that person who is practicing this Nishkama Karma Yoga? Alex is saying that it was a bit rushed, so I'll contextualize that a little quickly in chapter 5. Because Arjuna, he's asking the question, what is better, sannyas or karma yoga, right? Because Krishna in the previous chapter, he's talking about attaining peace by jnana and then renouncing karma by jnana. But then after saying you should renounce karma by jnana, Krishna then tells Arjuna, then take up to karma yoga. So Arjuna, he's very, very confused because for him, he finds it impossible to perform both renunciation of work, karma sannyas, and to do so in knowledge, right? While working with detachment simultaneously. So in this way, he feels like there's a real contradiction. And so he asks, what do I do? Do I do sannyas or karma yoga? And then we find texts 2 to 6. They're very much saying karma yoga is equal to, but it's easier than sannyas, right? And this is the general gist, at least of how I've studied it. And that's roughly, I think, what Abhishek Prabhu would have been getting at. Obviously, he would have been doing it with a little more depth and with his own tone. But I'm just quickly trying to summarize it because just going off Alex's message, I think we're not so comfortable with the beginning of chapter 5. So in that sense, Arjuna, he's still confused. Purijan Prabhu, he says the reason why Arjuna is still confused is Arjuna is very merciful. And he knows that these are confusing topics. Again, as I said, if you're feeling like this section is a little bit hard to get your head around, these first 6 chapters, if you're feeling it's a little dry, don't worry. Arjuna is feeling similarly, or if we're understanding him to be playing the pastime, he knows it's confusing stuff. And he's asking a similar question again and again and again, so that these things can be clearer. But don't be intimidated by how complex and nuanced all of these things can be. And also don't worry, as I said, the next few chapters are in my opinion, a little easier to grasp than these ones. As I said, we've gone through the difficult part already. So, so we've got this discussion here. And as I said, Purijan Prabhu says this is Arjuna's mercy. He keeps on asking so that we can have it clarified for us. So continuing that, he explains how karma yoga is better, right? Just because of its ease and so on and so forth. A karma yogi is a true sannyasi, right? And ultimately, they are the same. We should not see them as distinct. The final point that he makes in text 6 is that merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in activity, this is much more difficult and is much more distressful. And therefore, we now come to texts 7 to 12. Text 7 to 12 are describing what then is the nature of the person who is engaged in this, the yoga yukta. The yoga yukta is that person who is acting in what sense? He is acting as one who is perfecting karma yoga, right? So he's a yoga yukta. And we find this person is described, yoga yukto vishuddhatma, right? This person who works, Srila Prabhupada writes, in devotion, right? He is a pure soul, vishuddhatma. So we're hearing about the nature and qualities of this person, and that defines again this section. So so it's pretty straightforward. We're hearing about his nature and qualities, right? We then go on and then we hear about, actually, Mrugank, we can do the outline if you'd like. We then go on after that section, after 7 to 12, which really describes the nature. We hear about how, because we have this general tension, right? Any discussion of renouncing work, because we have work being done, and yet we can wonder, well, who is doing the work, right? So then texts 13 to 16, they naturally flow from 7 to 12, because 13 to 16, there we will be discussing, oh, so he is the non-doer, but if he is the non-doer, Krishna is also a karta. Krishna is also the non-doer, and of course the material nature, right? And the material nature is dead. It is dravya, right? It is unalive, right? So how can we say then that that is the doer? And so then texts 13 to 16 are a revision of what we've already discussed in chapter 4, right? Who is the doer? What is the relationship between these three things? the Supreme Lord, the individual soul, and the material nature. What is the role of all of these? And what is the relationship of Krishna to it? We'll also discuss a few things that are unique to that section. Krishna, he describes a response. People will often say, oh, this karma system, it is fatalism. Or, oh, this karma system, it is unfair, right? People will describe all of these things. And Krishna, he will provide the reasoning about why such arguments are maybe less than wise. So that happens there. Once understanding this knowledge that is described in 13 to 16, or actually we could say even 7 to 16. Once understanding the knowledge, I guess, of the whole chapter 5, and really of the Bhagavad-gītā that has been discussed so far, we begin to hear about the questions of liberation. And liberation is actually the concern of the remainder of the 5th chapter, text 17 to 29. Text 17 to 29 can be summed up with liberation. And now we're finally reaching the point that we've been teasing this whole time, right? We've been talking about, you do this to be purified, you do that to be purified. Well, what is the goal of that purification, right? What is that liberation that is being aimed towards? That is what is discussed in 17 to 29. And we will fully discuss that in chapter 6. So 17 to 29, you can break it down more. But in my opinion, it's really just a very flowing section. You can break it down more just for your own personal study, just to help you memorize the flow. But in terms of actual chunks, I find that it flows rather clearly, except for text 27 to 29. Texts 27 to 29, they really establish chapter 6. Texts 27 to 29, they are no longer discussing questions of Nishkama Karma Yoga or anything. We are straight up discussing Ashtanga Yoga. We've already had some hints of Ashtanga Yoga. We've already had some hints of it in chapter 4, but the end of chapter 5 explicitly starts talking about it, and chapter 6 is a full-blown discussion of it. And then after chapter 6 comes your closed book exam, and then we will go on to the Bhakti Yoga sections, where everything is very explicitly about Bhakti. So we won't, it's much more straightforward. Okay, so this is the general overview, I find, of the chapter. Again, as I said, some people will break it down more. If any of you are studying from Surrender Unto Me, you'll find Purijan Prabhu breaks it into smaller chunks. But for our purposes, I think these chunks at least help you get the rough flow of the chapter. So chapters 2 to 6, they're really talking about Karma Yoga, its relationship to sannyas, and now we are hearing about the Nishkama Karma Yogi. So coming back to the text that Bhagavad Prabhu so nicely read out to us. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul and who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. So we're hearing about this personality who is working, but he is never engaged, right? He is working, but he is working on a different platform than regular work. And because he's on a different platform, he doesn't have to worry about getting entangled in the platform of material nature. All of the points that are discussed here are discussed more, so we're just going to keep on going, and we're going to do texts 8 to 9 now. Because, as I've said, all of these points are going to be elaborated on furthermore as we keep on going. Okay, this is, because it's a joint one, maybe I'll recite the Sanskrit, and maybe we can have Katyayani Mataji. Would you like to read out the English after I've done the Sanskrit? Naiva kinchit karomi ti yukto manyeta tattvavid Pashyan shrinvan sprishan jigran ashnan gachan swapan swashan pralapan visrijan grihnan unmishan nimishan napi indriyanidriyarteshu vartanta iti dharayan.
Translation. A person in the divine consciousness, although engaged in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving about, sleeping and breathing, always knows within himself that he actually does nothing at all, because while speaking, evacuating, receiving, or opening or closing his eyes, he always notes that only the material senses are engaged with their objects and that he is aloof from them. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. So here we're finding the nature of him being a non-doer. He's completely non-engaged. And so we find Prabhupada, he mentions a list of the 5 immediate and remote causes in the purport, right? Causation is very much becoming a question coming up in our mind, right? Prabhupada, in many ways, he's preempting what will become the later discussion of who is actually doing anything. But naturally, these questions will come to our mind because we hear about this person. We hear how he's totally aloof, and yet so much is done. Now, this is a very long list, but this is a long list for a reason. Krishna, he's hitting all the points, right? No matter what he's doing, of all of the senses, of all of the activities, no matter what he's doing, he knows that the material senses are engaged with their objects and he is aloof from them. And again, we find an interesting point, right? Because if we think of all of the senses, if we think of this whole list, how easy is it to have them all disengaged from your material senses, right? Which one of us, right? Maybe we can close our eyes and then we will see only darkness, mind you. We will not see nothing. We often think darkness is nothing, but darkness is not nothing. We are still engaging with something, right? Smell, how many of us can stop smell unless we stop breathing? Even then is very difficult, right? Moving, we move without even, because eventually one has to sleep, and no matter, as is mentioned, one has to sleep and one has to breathe. And if one is sleeping and breathing in one sleep, everyone moves, right? Because we lose conscious control of our body, right? And if we are breathing, then we are smelling, right? And unless we want to have a very, very short remaining days, we will also need to eat. And if we eat, well, then we must touch and we must taste, right? So unless we plug in our ears, well, then we can't avoid hearing, right? So no matter what, all of these things are going on. So shutting them down is just, again, action in inaction, right? Because we cannot avoid it. And yet the person engaged in Nishkama Karma Yoga, he is the Yoga Yukta, he is never entangled in these things, right? And so Srila Prabhupada now, he raises the point, right? He is transcendental, right? To all of these different, he is transcendental to all of those things, which depend on the 5 immediate and remote causes: the doer, the work, the situation, the endeavor, and fortune. And why is this? We will then discuss in the next text, in text 10. Maybe Srinivas Prabhu can read the English after I've recited the shloka. Mrugank Prabhu, if we can go to the next text, I'll recite the shloka. Brahmanyadhyaya karmani sangam tyaktva karoti ya lipyatena sapapena padmapatram ivam bhasa.
Translation: one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf of untouched by water. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So here we find, right, the question might be asked, well, if the non-doer, he is completely detached to all the different factors of action, right? If he is completely detached from all of these things, then why does he do anything at all, right? Why are things done? What is the purpose of what is being done? And furthermore, if his actions do not result in karmic reactions, right, what do they result in? Well, what they result in are offerings to the Supreme Lord. What is being done are things surrendered to the Supreme Lord, right? All of these things are offered in such a way, and this is why these activities are done. They are not done for material reasons. You might remember the triangle we drew 2 weeks ago, right? If one directly engages with the Supreme Lord, then one is not engaging with the material nature, and therefore, even though they appear to act, they are like the lotus leaf floating in the water, right? We've all seen lotus leaves before, right? No matter how muddy the water is, the lotus leaf is untouched and pure and beautiful, right? Even though it is in the water, it transcends it. To use the common English phrase, in the world, but not of the world, right? And so in this way, we understand the natural question, right? Why then is activity done? And for what purpose is it done? It is done in order to surrender the results onto the Supreme Lord. And this is in fact the distinction between Nishkama Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, right? Because in Nishkama Karma Yoga, what happens? The results, one surrenders the fruit of their works onto the Supreme Lord. But in Bhakti Yoga, one surrenders themselves onto the Supreme Lord. Here we find the distinction. So this is why in general, we often characterize this section as being Nishkama Karma Yoga. As we know, Srila Prabhupada plays it a bit more hard and loose with calling lots of things Bhakti Yoga, and he's very right to do so. Once we finish the Bhagavad-gītā, I wish to come back to this point and show how Prabhupada translates it in this way and why it's valid and the nuances of it. But I find that's actually easier to understand after we've studied the whole Bhagavad-gītā. So we will come back to that later on. Okay, but now we will ask the question. So if this person, he knows he's a spirit soul, he knows he's not his body, right? Why does he act then at all, right? He is detached. Why does he still perform work? We understand the nature of this work, that it's not getting any reactions. We understand that he's done it for this purpose, but why then does he work? Why does he do it at all? He doesn't need to do it, does he? Then we come to the next text, and maybe we can have Alex, would you like to read out the translation of text 11 after I say the Sanskrit?
Sure.
Kayena manasa buddhya kevalairindriyairapi yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva shuddhaye.
The yogis, abandoning attachment, act with body, mind, intelligence, and even with the senses, only for the purpose of purification.
Yeah. So there we find it, right? Here we find a full mention of the reason why. The question is very natural. Why is this done? And the reason why is it is being done for purification. This action is done that one might be purified in order to perform direct meditation on jnana. Again, karma means jnana. Karma means the purification for jnana, right? So why is this being done? All of these things are being engaged for atma shuddhaye, right? So that one might be purified. And then we come now to text 12. Now, text 12 doesn't link directly to everything else. Text 12 rather is the summary of this whole thing. And in fact, we might say that text 12 is really our summary text for the entirety of what Nishkama Karma Yoga is, right? So maybe we could have Divyansh, would you like to read out the English after I say the Sanskrit?
Yes.
Yukta karma phalam tyaktva shantim apnoti naishtikim ayukta kama karena phale sakto nibadhyate. And just a quick point before Divyansh tells us the English. I won't mark you down in the shloka test, but often people are in the habit of saying karma phalam tyaktva or phale sakto nibadhyate. People often get in that habit. That's good. That's a valid Hindi or Bengali or most modern Indian languages. I don't know which ones have retained saying pa, but saying fa is actually a modern development in the languages. I'm not sure if it precedes the influence of Persian on the northern Indian languages. It could not. But at the very least, it is a modern development. When we recite Sanskrit, ideally you want to say pa, like that, not fa. Again, I won't mark you down if you say yukta karma phalam tyaktva, but just because, just in general, we want to pronounce it as well as we can, right? So yukta karma phalam tyaktva, like that. Okay, Divyansh Prabhu, if you would like to say the translation.
Yeah. The steadily devoted soul attains unadulterated peace because he offers the result of all activities to me, whereas a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruit of his labor, becomes entangled.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there we have it. This is the summary. What is Nishkama Karma Yoga? It is this, right? If the shloka memory list was up to me, I would put this one in there, because if you really internalize this, this will be your definition. This is your definition. This is how you can understand it, right? The karma yogi, he attains what? Naishtikim shantim, right? Unadulterated peace. By giving up karma phalam tyaktva, right? By renouncing the fruits of his work, right? In this way, we understand he attains peace, and therefore in that peace, he is able to execute the Jnana Yoga. Now in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, he makes a few mentions of the question of the difference between the person in Krishna consciousness and in bodily consciousness. And I find it's very interesting because Krishna, he makes a point which sometimes, Srila Prabhupada makes a point regarding Krishna's teachings, which is sometimes missed by people. Again, it's a point that I've made before, so I won't stress it too much. But as I've said, chapter 5 is very much revision of what we've already all done before. People will often say, oh, let me renounce the fruits of my works. I'll be totally unattached and I won't engage with anything. And I'm just going to ignore everything around me. And I'm just going to sit down still and like that. Or they'll think I'm engaging in activities and I won't get attached to anything. And I'm going to be some detached sort of psychopath. And because of that, I will grow in my spiritual life. But Srila Prabhupada, he makes a point that actually ultimately this is unhealthy. Krishna consciousness is not about becoming detached. Now we might say, well, that's contradicting everything I've heard. We hear about the values of detachment. But what Srila Prabhupada says is that Krishna consciousness is about detachment to the false lies of the material world, right? It is about becoming detached from the falsities of the material world and becoming attached to Krishna, right? It is not that we become detached from everything. Krishna consciousness is the process by which we become more attached to Krishna. In fact, Krishna consciousness is all about becoming more attached. Our goal in life is not to become detached, but to become so attached that we can't help it. Our whole life is built on the intensity of our attachment. And why is this? Prabhupada makes a point. We cannot suppress the fact that we have to be attached. I was listening to one class by Srila Prabhupada on the Nectar of Devotion just a few days ago. And Srila Prabhupada, he talks about how people, no matter what, they will have ashakti, they will have attachment. But either they will have attachment to the bodies of their relatives, right? And they will not identify with the souls of their relatives, not attached to that, but they will identify to the temporary bodies which come and go, right? And even if they don't have relatives, if they decide not to marry, if they decide to be single, then naturally they will, Prabhupada says, they will have a dog instead. Prabhupada uses the example. And we see today, I still remember I used to work in a cafe in Port Macquarie. And one of the workmates, she was saying, look at my baby. And I thought, oh, wow, that's so exciting. She's had a child. And everyone was saying, oh, wow, I love how cute the outfit is. So I thought, okay, there'll be some cute baby in an outfit. And then she showed me, it was a photo of her puppy with she had dressed the puppy up with a tie and everything. And I thought, this is the example, right? This is what Srila Prabhupada has said, right? No matter what, we can't help but be attached. As we will continue to discuss, if we are attached to things like the body, and that's what we'll discuss in the second half of the 5th chapter. If we are attached to things like the body and all, these things will come and go, right? And they will cause us only an ocean of pain and suffering, right? But if we are attached to Krishna, then we can be meaningfully attached to everyone else as well, right? In a very transcendental way, because we become attached to them by who they truly are. Spirit souls, sparks of Krishna, right? We become attached to them in such a way. And in that way, we can truly love them, right? In a way where they do not come and go, and we do not engage in the lives of the material world. So coming back to the point, it is the nature of our soul to be attached. To try and suppress attachment is unnatural and unhealthy, right? But so is becoming attached to those things that will only cause us pain. We can so easily forget how traumatic this material world is, right? But we will come back to that as we continue discussing. So just to make the point, again and again and again, I want to stress this because so many people so unhealthily practice Krishna consciousness and wish to suppress who they are. Krishna consciousness is about becoming who you truly are, right? Not suppressing who you are. And that is expressed in the terms of more and more attachment. The more attachment we have, the better. But let it be attachment to Krishna. This is Krishna consciousness. So then now we've finished this discussion, and I think this will probably be the last time we really discuss Nishkama Karma Yoga for a bit. So what happens then? Now we have the natural question which arises. And this is the natural question which comes to mind whenever we discuss this, right? It is the question of the three doers, right? And so we will discuss these three, then we'll have a quick activity, and then we'll have our break. So what is the next text? Text 13. Maybe we can have, who's here today? Jaswant Prabhu. I don't think I've asked you in a long while. Jaswant Prabhu, if you could recite the English after I've recited the Sanskrit. Sarva karmani manasa sanyasyaste sukham vasi navadvare pure dehi naiva kurvan nakarayan.
When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentality renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, the material body neither working nor causing work to be done.
Jai. So, Mrugank Prabhu, if you want to get the notes up, we can discuss quickly. We can discuss, well, firstly, Krishna now he's beginning to switch into a discussion of the doer, which I think is pretty obvious, right? We're talking about the controlling his nature, but he is neither working nor causing work to be done, for he is residing happily in the city of the 9 gates, right? So what is the city of the 9 gates? The city of the 9 gates is the body, right? And what are the 9 gates? Who can tell me?
Two eyes, 2 ears.
Two of these. 2 nostrils.
2 nostrils.
2 nostrils, the mouth, and the two body organs for excretion.
Yes. Yes, Prabhupada has it listed in the purport. So Prabhupada lists them as 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 1 mouth, the anus, and the genitals. So these are the 9 ways with which the human body, it interacts with the outside world, right? These are the, if you will, again, the gates, right? These are all the entry and exit ways. So this is the city of the 9 gates, right? So it sounds very esoteric. Can we be attached to Prabhupada? Very good question, Alex. 100%. If we are not attached to Prabhupada, we have no attachment to Krishna. If you say you are attached to Krishna, but you are not attached to Prabhupada, then you're not truly attached to Krishna at all, right? In fact, Prabhupada, one devotee once asked Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, if we meditate, because we know there's a famous text, at the time of death, what you meditate upon, you will go there. And they asked Srila Prabhupada, if we meditate upon the devotees, if we meditate upon the spiritual master, will we go back home, back to Godhead, to Krishna? Because we are thinking about the spiritual master, not about Krishna. Prabhupada said, yes, you will go, right? Because Krishna, without his devotees, is not Krishna. We cannot be attached to Krishna without Prabhupada. We can be attached to Prabhupada without Krishna, right? Interestingly enough, right? But gradually, as we become more and more attached to Prabhupada, naturally, we will become attached to Krishna, right? Naturally, this will come. Because if the more and more we become attached to Prabhupada, and it's not very difficult to become attached to Prabhupada. You hear so many stories. I remember one devotee, I was in New Govardhan, and there's this one devotee there. And one devotee told me he was actually one of Prabhupada's bodyguards, right? They'd hired him or something because I don't know if you know, at Melbourne University, they became very aggressive with Prabhupada. They were they were all very upset because I forgot why. I think they were communists or something. I can't remember. It was a mixture of everything: fundamentalist Christians, communists. All of them came and they started causing like a mini riot. So Prabhupada had some bodyguard, and this bodyguard just by having the association of Prabhupada with a semi-favorable mindset, he completely fell in love with Krishna consciousness, right? So it's not very hard to become attached to Prabhupada, right? Prabhupada is so sweet. However, once attachment to Prabhupada comes, then naturally they'll become attachment to Krishna, right? Because we'll see Krishna, Prabhupada is completely in love with Krishna. And when we become attached to Prabhupada, we wonder, who is this Krishna that Srila Prabhupada is so attached to, right? And naturally, this relationship will happen. So yeah, can we be attached to Prabhupada? We should be attached to Prabhupada. We must be attached to Prabhupada. It's not a can, it's a must we. And the answer is yes, we must. Attachment to the devotee is the real perfection. As we know, Krishna famously says, he who says he is my devotee is not my devotee, but he who is the devotee of my devotee, that is my devotee. Right? Jai, Jai. There's a lot to be discussed there. We can go very, very deep into that topic. But yes, can we be attached to Prabhupada? Yes, completely. So coming back to the text at hand, text 13. So what is the city of the 9 gates? The city of 9 gates is the body, right? And so when one is in the city, when one is in a city, one doesn't think because I am in the city, I am the city, right? One has a relationship to the city, definitely, because when one is in the city, if we know Bhagavad-gītā Mataji, you are in Brisbane, right?
Yes, Prabhu.
So your relationship to Brisbane is different than my relationship to Brisbane, right? And your relationship to Sydney is different than my relationship to Sydney, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you are Brisbane and I am Sydney, right?
Yeah.
I've been gaining enough weight in the lockdown to probably say that I could be Sydney, but I'm not quite there yet, right? I am not the city, right? But we still do have a relationship. It's not that the body is completely detached from us, as we've already discussed, and Prabhupada will discuss in the later purports. The body is related to us in the sense that it is an expression of our desires, right? But it is not that we are the body, and therefore we are not the doer, right? So because of this, he is in the city, he resides happily in it, but he is neither working nor causing the work to be done. Then we come to text 14. Na kartritvam na karmani lokasya srijjati prabhuhu na karma phala samyogam svabhavastu pravartate. Maybe we can have, who's next? Oh, Bhagavad-gītā Mataji. Would you like to read out the English?
Yes, Prabhu, thank you. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature.
Jai. So we hear again, now we've had the introduction of the third player, right? The first one we've heard the jiva, right? And the jiva is not the doer, right? And now we've heard another doer, right? The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature, right? So here we have the material nature is being introduced. As I said, we've got this tripartite relationship. So with all of that mentioned, there's a natural question that comes up to people's minds. If I'm not the doer, well then why do I have to undergo all of these reactions, right? Why am I undergoing all of these karmic processes, right? This is great injustice. If I'm not the doer, why doesn't the material world get the karmic reaction, right? If the Supreme Lord is the doer, well then why doesn't he get the karmic reaction? Let Krishna have a little bit of a rough time. Why is it always me, right? So this question can arise, right? If we are not the doer, well then why are we getting the reaction? Why should I be held responsible? And then we come to text 15, and text 15 is very, very deep. Very, very deep indeed. And maybe we can have, is Vidhi Mataji there?
Yes, Prabhu.
If you would like to read out the English after I recite the Sanskrit.
Sure, Prabhu.
Nadate kasya chit papam na chaiva sukritam vibhuhu agyane navritam jnanam tena muhyanti jantavaha.
Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge.
So here we have it. The Supreme Lord doesn't assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. What's going on there, right? Why is there any responsibility, right? And so here we'll come to some common arguments people make. Reincarnation is an unjust system. Reincarnation is fatalism, right? Maybe many of us have heard this before. People will say, oh, this whole reincarnation system, it just means that if you see somebody suffering, it means just ignore their suffering, right? I'm sure you've heard people not actually say that you should do this. I mean, I hope you haven't. If you do, please correct them on my behalf. But you might hear people say this is the result, right? There is complete injustice in the Vedic system because nobody, or at least there is no compassion because everyone sees suffering and they think, this person is just getting their karma, right? And it's just completely unfair, right? Because the living entity does not make these strong decisions. They are so influenced by the three other things. And the Supreme Lord, he has had to allow it, right? So if the Supreme Lord allowed it, well then why doesn't he get the blame, right? And these are all logical thoughts. I don't think these are actually particularly silly arguments, right? But Krishna here, he's particularly addressing them. And he's particularly addressing them how, right? He's saying, nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities, right? Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their knowledge. And actually, this comes back to the principle we discussed in chapter 4. Who can guess which principle in chapter 4 is relevant to this text here and to this question that we are posing? Who can guess in chapter 4? Can anyone think what text might be relevant to the discussion at hand, to the fairness of Krishna? Why does this not implicate Krishna? How can Krishna remain unmoved, immutable, and yet still being engaging with these activities? Feel free to be wrong, because most of the texts would actually, so even if you say the one I'm not thinking about, who can guess?
412.
Pardon?
412.
Yes, 412. 412 is good, right? That's exactly the context, right? Because he's created the system, but he's not the author of the stories. Ye yatha mam prapadyante, we hear in text 11. Krishna, what does he do, right? He reciprocates what each person wants. And Prabhupada here in the purport, he discusses this, right? The Lord is Vibhu, or omniscient, but the living entity is Anu, or atomic. Because he is a living soul, he has the capacity to desire by his free will. Such desire is fulfilled only by the omnipotent Lord. And so when the living entity is bewildered in his desires, the Lord allows him to fulfill those desires. But the Lord is never responsible for the actions and reactions of the particular situation which may be desired. Being in a bewildered condition, therefore, the embodied soul identifies himself with the circumstantial material body and becomes subjected to the temporary misery and happiness of life. So here we find it discussed. What is the point? That actually each individual jiva wishes to be in this world, right? Each individual jiva wishes to be here. It is not, right? And it is not that karmic reactions are Krishna laying down judgment day, right? We're so used to these notions of the day of judgment, right? That actually, though, this is not what Krishna is doing. Krishna is merely reciprocating the desire, right? So if somebody takes birth as a pig, it's not because Krishna looks at them and says, you have been a very, very nasty person, so I will punish you to be a pig. It's that, well, if all you want to do is eat, sleep, and mate, well, it's a lot easier to do that as a pig than it is to do it as a human. You don't have to worry about going to school. You don't have to worry about having a job. You don't need to worry about any of these other desires. You can just do all of these things, right? And that's why we'll hear maybe, I think to a degree they're somewhat simplified, right? But we'll hear people say, if a person is a nudist, they'll become a tree, right? Because you don't need to wear clothes when you're a tree, right? Of course, the process is maybe much more complicated than that. People who will get stoned heaps will become a field of grass. Exactly. And in fact, I sometimes say people who get stoned, for those of you who don't know, stoned is the colloquial term for getting high on marijuana, right? So people who do lots of those drugs, I think they likely will become stones themselves, because stones don't move, they lie down, they're chilling out, right? Just like people who are constantly intoxicated are, right? So we'll see like that, right? It's just a natural reciprocation of the person's desires. It is cause and effect. It is not that Krishna is throwing people into these things, and therefore Krishna, he's not implicated. He's merely saying, oh, you desire this, well, go ahead, right? All of the jivas, all of us in this material world, we wish to enjoy the world apart from Krishna. And so Krishna says, okay, here you go. You don't want to enjoy with me? You don't want to dance with me? Well, that's all right. Here, go dance on your own, right? And the fact that that dance is a very lonely, upsetting dance is our problem, not his. And yet Krishna is so merciful, right? Krishna is so merciful that he has designed the world that we might learn this lesson. So people who dance with Krishna a lot in kirtan will dance with Krishna forever in Vrindavan. Well, yeah, they're already dancing with Krishna in Vrindavan, right? So that's the whole point of kirtan, right? And that's the great mercy of kirtan. Kirtan is an invitation, this world of suffering, this world where you're desiring to please yourself. Forget it, right? Just come and dance, right? Stop trying to lord it over the material nature and renounce all of it, right? Kirtan is very powerful in this way, right? Kirtan is an invitation to forget ourselves. And we'll discuss that actually in the second half of the 5th chapter. Anyways, so in this sense, Krishna, he doesn't take anyone's sinful or pious activities. Why doesn't he assume them? Because he's not responsible for them. He's merely saying, okay, you want this? Here, go ahead, right? Go ahead. Now, why isn't it fatalistic? Because that way, when we see somebody suffering, we're only seeing somebody suffering the faults, the results of their desires, right? And so therefore, it's not that we have to think in our head, oh, well, this is just justice being served. No, instead, we should feel compassion and think, well, here we can share with somebody the means by which they can overcome these desires which have resulted in this unfortunate condition, right? And then we come to the final text, text 16. And text 16 is very much actually, you know what? I'm going to say text 15 finishes that point. We're going to have our 5-minute break. I'll see you all at 11 past. Then we'll have our activity. And then we will finish chapter 5. By hook or by crook, we will be finishing chapter 5 today. Okay, I'll see you all at 11 past 11. And hopefully you'll be refreshed. We'll have our little activity and then we'll keep on going. And if you have any questions, yeah, type them in the chat because you'll forget in 5 minutes. Okay, Hare Krishna. See you in 5. Yeah, because my headphones aren't working, so that recording in progress will be emboldened into the recording. So just as a point, with the closed book questions, you can look over them in your own time. They're easy stuff. Like just for example, in chapter 5, some of it is stuff that we haven't actually talked about, but it's literally just a word for word thing. Like they'll say, what does this phrase mean from chapter 5, right? Like I've just got it up here. Like one question is, give the English meaning of Pandita Samadarshinaha, right? Which in text 18, you just go for the word for word, you find Pandita Samadarshinaha. It means those who are wise who see with equal vision. Done. That's the example of the sort of questions you'll get. So yeah, just flashcard it. If you guys use flashcards. Okay, let's keep going then. So we were discussing all of this, right? So all of the Supreme Lord, that's how he relates to activity, and therefore he cannot be implicated in activity, right? He cannot be implicated in it at all because he's merely reciprocating it. So in this sense, we find the differing levels of doership. Now that we've discussed it a bit, I don't want to discuss it too much, but I want to make sure you'll have a grasp. So our activity is maybe Mrugank Prabhu, run away from your diagram, because our activity is that we're all going to draw our own diagrams, but use practical examples, right? So we wanna just draw out a diagram of the flow. Don't do the triangle, do your own take on it, but just to show this process, right? Just to show that you've grasped it, because otherwise it's a little difficult, right? And remember that the jiva, sometimes he emphasizes not having that much will, because he's, as Prabhupada writes in the purport, he's anu, he is tiny, right? He has a tiny bit of free will, right? Whereas the Supreme Lord has vibhu, he has all the free will, right? So because he has all the free will, he is the one who authorizes everything to happen. And yet, how does he authorize things? He authorizes it based on the identity of the based on the will of the individual Anu Chaitanya. So as we break into the groups, I want you all to try and think of an analogy, right? A practical analogy that that demonstrates this. And if you can, draw it out in a diagram, right? Does that make sense? So you'll all have like 3-4 minutes. Just think of an analogy which identifies this principle, right? This principle being, of course, the relationship of the three. Try to think creatively, right? So creatively think of an analogy we can use to describe it, because people will struggle. These are questions like this are very philosophically complex, right? So this is what we call the preaching application section of Bhakti-śāstrī. So I want you all to go into your groups, and I'm only going to make 3 groups. So they're going to be relatively small groups. And in our groups, let's try to come up with an analogy, and then you can all share your analogies when we're back. I'm only going to give you 4 minutes because it's pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so assemble you into breakout rooms. Okay, I'll see you all on the other side. Hare Krishna. Okay. So, we only had 3, so maybe each group can show us what they came up with, and then I'll share. Purijan Prabhu has a really, in my opinion, I just love it. I think it's also really a cute analogy. So, but anyways, everyone else go first, and then we'll share that one. And yes, Alex, I fully agree that the world is always ending, but it's ending a little more than usual. Okay, which group wants to go first?
We can present Prabhu first.
Okay, please.
Okay, 1 second. Let me share this. Okay, Prabhu, this is what we could come up with in that time. So basically, what we see at the center is a buffet of material nature. So jiva, jiva has to do some karma, like it can't be like it will be eating or not eating, always doing something, and it is as a result, it's therefore keep on desiring to either to do or to not to do or whatever, like, and then that is based on desire. Krishna then review the desire and based on the available quota of that person's, karma and whatnot. It basically sanctions, and through the material nature, it presents the buffet of various things that jiva can or can't do. But the choice is jiva's itself. Even though a lot of it is the jiva have to do something out of his control, but nonetheless, he still has some choices that he can make. And those choices then results into sort of the cycle goes on. So in a nutshell, the jiva desires, it gets sanctions through the Krishna, and his desire is delivered by the material nature, not in the exact imagination of the jiva as he may have, but in a similar form. We don't know, Prabhu, whether we hit the mark or we are going.
No, it's good. It's good. I thought you were making more points. Sorry. Yeah, that's good, Jai. Yeah. So it's exactly the material nature. It provides the options, and it also provides the activity, and the jiva expresses its desire. And Krishna, he authorizes both the material nature and the jiva expressing the desire. Can you what is the big arrow on the side? Desire for karma?
Oh, no, this is the because one has to do some karma. You can't be, you always be doing something. Either you're doing while you are, and therefore as a part of that, you are always desiring. It's your desire which makes you to do or not do something. So it's the desire. End of the day, it's a desire.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Jai, very nice, very nice. Okay, very good. Now, which group next? Let's have was it Alex and Srinivas Prabhu and Shri? Was that the other group?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes.
Let's hear.
We haven't prepared any diagram.
Yeah,
like
but
current
if you have an analogy or something, that's perfect. Anything just so you can show that you can easily describe to somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is from the Burjan Prabhu's commentary on the
Jai.
surrender unto me. So it's explained that a child is trying to lift a weight. Actually, he has a desire to follow his dad, like, lifting the, he's unable to do that, but he has a desire to do that. So by looking at the desire of the child, the father stands behind him and actually lifts the weight. So the child thinks that he is actually doing, but actually the father is doing the actual work. So this is what we could understand from this analogy, Prabhu.
Yes, that one's my favorite one, because the whole idea is, you can imagine a father, he's lifting weights and the child sees the weights and he thinks, I want to do the same. So the child goes up to the weights and he thinks, I will do it. But of course the child can't lift it up. And that's the relationship between the jiva and the Supreme Lord. The jiva is Anu Chaitanya, a small bit of consciousness, but the Supreme Lord is Vibhu Chaitanya, infinite consciousness. And so just the same, the child is putting his hands and he's lifting, but he can't. So the father behind, to let the child have the feeling of satisfaction, lifts up the weights for him. So the child feels like he's lifting the weights up, right? So the weights of the material world, the father is the Supreme Lord, and the son or the child is the spirit soul. And so we can say, who's lifting the weights up, right? Ultimately, we can say it's maybe more the Supreme Lord, but it's also the desire of the child. The child is the one pushing for it. The weights would not have been lifted up if the child didn't have the desire for it, right? So it's cute, but it's also a rather deep analogy, I find.
I just want to share my experience.
Please do.
Well, I was in India. I used to ride my bike, and my son, he's very young and he's very passionate about riding the bike. And he used to sit in front of me, because in India we can do anything while we ride. So while you're doing that, I used to give him a handle to hold up. So and he thinks that he is riding actually. He's too young at that time. So
yeah, that's the same example. It's very cute.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, so then the last group was, I think, was that Mrunal, Shivam, Divyansh in the last group? Or am I getting confused?
No.
It shows Mrugank as well.
Yes, Mrugank.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can share my screen. Oh no, it's gone. That's a shame. Okay, I'll stop sharing. Essentially, we just did the example, or we did two examples. One was a person who wanted to be intoxicated, and the other was the person who wanted to serve. So we said that we're all spirit souls, and then from the soul, if you can imagine a down arrow, we say all spirit souls desire. But then our desire, it takes an input. You can imagine an arrow going into the desire. It takes an input of the three modes. And then from the desire downwards, then because of the three modes, we may desire based on the mode. So we might desire to be intoxicated, for example. And then the result of that, so after we desire to be intoxicated, Krishna steps in and sanctions the action. And then after Krishna sanctions the action, the three modes carry out the action. And then we get the result. And then the result informs the desire again for the next cycle. Then we had a second arrow going up from desire saying if we wanted to do devotional service, then the actions, Krishna still sanctions our desire to do service, but this time it's not influenced by the three modes, either before the action is performed or when the action is carried out, because it's carried out by the internal energy. and then it leads to purification rather than, you know, the normal karmic result. That was what we had.
Jai, perfect. So I think hearing all of that and all of that discussion, I think we've all got a good grasp on this then. Of course, it becomes a bit more complicated. We can think more and more and, you know, get ourselves confused and all, but at least I think on a basic level, yeah, that's a rather common question. I think is an important one to be able to answer. Also because sometimes Shastra seems to contradict itself, but it's just emphasizing different ones. There's a saying, I forgot who said it, but they said you should act like when you do things, you should act like you're the only one who can do it. Like you're the one who's fully in control. But when you pray, you should pray knowing that the Supreme Lord is the only one who does it, right? So when you act, you should think it's entirely based on my endeavor. But when you pray, you should pray with the realization that it's all based on the sanction of the Lord, right? So there's all these nuances that can get pulled out. Okay, I'm happy we've all got that. Now I'm going to try to get as deep into chapter 5. I am still hoping to finish it, but at this point, I'm going to need Krishna's mercy. So yeah, so we'll try, but I'm not going to read out the Sanskrit just so that we can have a realistic chance of finishing chapter 5.
Just a quick one before we. Prabhu, just on that, whether Krishna is responsible for all the things that happen around us or not, could it be true that Krishna is like everything what we define as good and bad and everything, Krishna is beyond that, i.e. everything has come out of him in one way or another. So he's agnostic to all of that. So just because of a desire results into something what we call it as bad, I mean, he don't really care, like in the sense that whether it is just the way he has designed it, that, you know, you do this, you get that, you do this, you get that, you could do this, like it's for what we call it as bad, he may be agnostic to it, if you know. So we calling him that he's responsible, he's in fact like agnostic, like he can act out of mercy, but none, like in true sense, he's created all of it. And hence he's not really saying, you know, this is better than that, so therefore I have not given you this, so therefore you are in punishment because the other one was better.
Yeah, so could you give like a one-sentence summary? Like I'm following, but I'm just trying to get the
Prabhu, the crux of the question is it says Krishna is not responsible. That's what we are trying to sort of do, in that for all the actions that happen and all the karmic reactions that happens as a result of those actions. It is we who say that this reaction is good and this reaction is bad, the way that we feel the sufferings of it. But the sufferings is a result of, like, all of that is created by Krishna, like good as well as bad and everything in between. And the good and bad definition is sort of our human sort of contemplated that this is good and this is bad. The Krishna is agnostic to all of that because it's he who created both of it, and he's sort of beyond all that anyways. He's beyond this bodily thoughts and this material nature, how we define, you know, whether we are suffering or not suffering.
Yeah, so I think with that there's a few dimensions there, and to many degrees it's correct, but also we should keep in mind, I think the question is less good or bad, and the question is more suffering and joy, right? And so I think that's more the reality. People often speak about the problem of evil, but I actually think the problem, nobody really cares about the problem of evil. No one cares that there's evil in the world. People cares that there's suffering in the world, right? Suffering is real, right? Bhakti-Vikas Maharaj, he says, the one starting point you can begin with everyone is that suffering is real, right? And so when we phrase it in terms of suffering, how do I put it? This material world itself is actually perfect, right? And that seems to run contradictory to everything we hear. The material world is perfect. It's perfect for what it's there for. We're not, but what it's not perfect for is what we want to do with it, right? So in that sense, yes, in that sense, you could say that even even nothing bad in one sense exists, right? Because everything is good in the sense that everything can be used in Krishna's service, right? Everything used properly is good, right? So in that sense, that's true, right? Krishna is agnostic in the sense that, or rather you could say everything is good. Everything has been created by, everything is, well, created is difficult language because the universe was never created. It's always existed, right? So there's never a point where Krishna sat down and created the universe, where he sat down and created the jivas. They've always existed, right? So the question of creation becomes a little bit complicated. But we can say that all of it is Krishna's energy, and Krishna is perfect. How can he have imperfect energy, right? So rather, and in that sense, I'm agreeing with you. I'm just sort of framing it in terms of the broader philosophy, right? So we see that that then the suffering that arises, as you've rightfully said, does not arise out of actually reality itself being designed for suffering, but rather out of the desire for that reality to be used inappropriately, right? So the suffering is real, and I think, and Krishna directly is not affected by the suffering, but because the devotees feel compassion for the suffering, then Krishna, he is also brought to feel compassion for the suffering. So in that sense, he's not agnostic, but so I'm agreeing with you, but I'm sort of nuancing it, if you get what I mean. So Krishna does care for the suffering, right? The suffering upsets him because the devotees are heartbroken by the suffering in the material world. But it is true that nothing is inherently bad because the material world, it's how we are engaging with the material world that's bad. And that's why on the transcendental platform, which we're talking about, everything can be dovetailed, right? Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he used cigars in Krishna's service. He didn't use them personally, but he gave them in order to, in order to create a proper welcome, right? Cigars are one of the few things that I think most people on earth can agree are pretty nasty things, right? Nothing is inherently bad in that sense, right? But it's the way that we use and interact with things that's negative. So yeah, you could say the reality of suffering is generated by our creativity, not Krishna's. I don't know if that's what you were getting at.
Yes, Prabhu, that
yeah.
the suffering is like our creation in the sense that because we want things in a different way.
Yeah, and that's the point of this section, right? Krishna's saying, he's saying, it's not that I've directed these people to undergo it, is that people desire to try and be the lords of a world, which is just logically impossible, right? Because that is not our constitutional position, right? So they've desired to enjoy that which can't be enjoyed. They want to get salted caramel flavor out of a block of ice, right? So that's what's happened, right? So it just won't happen, right? But Krishna is saying that's not my arrangement, right? So yeah, that's the point that he's making. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's another way of framing what this section is getting at. Okay, are there any other questions from this section? Because it is a section that produces questions, if you will. Okay, we'll keep going then, and English only, I'm afraid, just because, yeah. If we're, what's the time? Okay, let's all start praying for me to be able to finish the chapter. Okay, so we went up to text 16, and now text 16 is an interesting transition in the chapter. This is where we start transitioning to the second half, which is talking about the nature of liberation. 16 sets up the chain, because what does it say? When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, and then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. So what is the point that's being made here? Is that once you understand this, right? Once you begin to understand the true nature of action, of reality, so on and so forth. Once you understand this, then you start entering into enlightenment. And enlightenment, as we said, gets rid of nescience, just as the sun lights up everything in daytime. So Krishna is starting to say, by truly understanding this, now we are coming close to liberation, right? So when one's ignorance is removed by knowledge about the living entity, material nature and the Supreme Lord, one will take shelter of the Lord and they will attain liberation, right? When we truly understand this, then we'll take shelter in the fact that the Lord is the ultimate shelter, right? And therefore, one will begin to approach liberation. And then with text 17, this motif, this idea gets carried out into its fullness, and we enter into the final section of the 5th chapter. And what do we hear? What do we hear? Oh, and before we get to that point, I just want to make one final point with text 16. What does it say? It says, oh wait, no, sorry. With text 17, there's an interesting mention. Actually, it's not in text 17. One second, I'm going off memory here. I'll come back to the point because I can't remember now where the Sanskrit is. If anyone can find which shloka mentions the word sattvam, sattvat, yes, I will be much appreciated. But anyways, in text 17, then we come to the point that when one's intelligent, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and proceeds straight on the path of liberation. Again, I think this is pretty straightforward, right? It's not saying anything too out there. Of course, we can always comment, but I don't think there's anything in particular we need to comment upon here. Then we come to text 18, and text 18 follows on from this. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater, right? So this is the vision, right? What is the result of one who focuses on the Supreme, right? What is the way he perceives the world? What is the result? What is the symptom of such a personality, if we want to question like Arjuna did, right? And the answer is, he is one who sees all with quality, right? And the reason for this is found in text 19, and then I want to comment on those a little briefly. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman. So we find that flowing from the fact that they are situated in Brahman, right? Flowing from the fact that they are on this platform, they are able to perceive the world that way. Now, why is that, right? Because they are no longer perceiving material nature, right? They are no longer perceiving material nature as their criteria. This is what I was mentioning before when I said that by not being attached, right? By not being attached to the body, but rather to be attached to somebody's true spiritual nature, one will truly be able to love them, because one is able to perceive not all of these material qualifications, but instead the true spark, right? The true essence of their spiritual nature, right? They'll be able to see that. And at any platform, actually, of spiritual achievement, if one is Brahman realized, right? If one has realized the impersonal Brahman, then they see everything is situated in the Brahman effulgence, right? And so they see how everything is all equal. If one is there on the Paramatma platform, they will see, oh, all of this, the Paramatma is in all of their hearts, and all of this is sanctioned by the Paramatma, right? So therefore, all of it is equal, right? All of these people are simply spirit souls who are reciprocating with the Paramatma. And if one is acting in Krishna consciousness, in the consciousness of Bhagavan, then they will see everything is Krishna's mercy. Nothing else is here but Krishna's mercy pouring forth. And so everyone will be acknowledged as being in that sort of position, right? In that sort of mindset, one is much more willing and able to fully appreciate each person for what they are. And therefore we see this as a symptom of spiritual life, right? It comes back to that same point that I was mentioning earlier on when we listed the symptoms in chapter 4, right? By being able to see everyone and anyone as equal, the equality of vision, this is the sign, this is the goal, this is the symptom of spiritual life. Because unlike Dhritarashtra, coming back to the very first shloka, who sees my armies and the armies of the sons of Pandu, we see all in equality, right? In equal vision, the Brahmana, the cow, the elephant, and the dog eater, all of them are seen in equality. There is no division, right? There is only unity. And this is why kirtan is so amazing. I really love kirtan for this reason. Alex brought up kirtan earlier. Because in kirtan, no matter who you are, We are all dancing and singing to the same tune, right? We are all dancing and singing to the same mantra, right? Irregardless, because it's on the spiritual platform, right? Irregardless of who we are all engaging in that same activity. It is cutting past all of the distinctions, right? It doesn't matter who you are or what sinful activities you performed 2 seconds ago, right? You turn up in the kirtan, we're all dancing and singing, right? This is an expression of that equality and equanimity, right? Not the impersonalists one where we all merge together. And then there is no equality, because equality implies that everyone is on the same platform, right? But everyone can't be on the same platform if there's only one, right? Equality is a shared oneness, not a lonely isolationist oneness, right? And so we can have that meaningfully. So this is the symptom, and this is the goal of spiritual consciousness, of Krishna consciousness, of any spiritual life, right? Is we shouldn't have they and them. What do we find in politics in the world today? No matter which country you go to, no matter which politician you hear, it's always these people are the cause of our problems, blah, 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 blah. This party, they messed the whole world up, blah, 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 blah. It's us versus them, it's us versus them, right? If you see the whole history of humanity, right? There'll always be one group of people who are the cause of all of our problems, right? And yet, who are the people who are blaming those other people are in actuality very much also the cause of all of our problems, right? And so spiritual consciousness is transcending all of that, right? So this is undoing the basic sin, if you will, the basic flaw of our material existence, to see me and my, I and them, and we begin to see all inequality. And what is this situated in? This is situated in that understanding. And we hear more about the symptoms of such a personality in text 20 to 21. Now, text 20 to 21, they're a little bit, how do I put it? These are not necessarily, how do I put it? These ones are not exactly, they're not exactly easy. As I said, we shouldn't take all of these descriptions. These are the descriptions of the siddha, of the perfected soul, right? We shouldn't take ourselves to think, oh, I'm not like this, so I've got no hope, right? It'll come with time, right? At least I hope so. I would like to be like this someday, right? So this is siddha, right? We shouldn't beat ourselves up thinking we should be like this tomorrow. And what are these qualities, right? A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the signs of God, is already situated in transcendence. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. So in this way, we hear all of these things, right? And we find here, there is the grand irony of spiritual life. And this is what makes spiritual life so countercultural, so revolutionary, so dangerous, right? This whole world, everyone is constantly trying to get things to be happy. They want successes to be happy. They want to avoid sadness in order to keep that happiness, right? And here we find the spiritualist. He is unbothered by either one, right? Either alternative bothers him not. And so we find the grand, I don't want to say mystery, but the grand paradox of spiritual life, right? Is that by having nothing, the sadhu, he is happier than anyone else. 1 second, I'm just plugging my laptop in, it's run out of charge. So by having nothing, the sadhu, he is happier than anyone else. This is why spiritual life is so powerful. It is completely independent from any material question, right? And therefore, we find that it is the sadhus who completely contradict the way the material world works. And I find in very many ways, they confirm the validity of spiritual life. Why? Because they show that there is something, that thing which we are all hungering towards, right? That happiness, they are not bothered by it, right? That which we earlier identified as being so vastly important is seen as not that important to them at all. That is, however, not to say that, get my video on. That is, however, not to say, though, that the devotee does, or that the spiritualist does not experience joy, but rather that they do not experience it based on the factor of the comings and goings of material happiness, because material happiness, as we are just about to read, are not at all factors that can be relied on. And therefore, we find the point that is made in 22, right? What does 22 say? An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery. Hey, this is one of your memory shlokas, isn't it? So you should all be very familiar with this. If not, get the stress going. So an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them, right? So the issue with material happiness is that it'll always disappoint us. Purijan Prabhu says, we all have people who we love, and all those people who we love are doomed to die, right? And therefore, all of our happiness are guaranteed a sorrow within them, right? At least if we identify those people who we love based on their bodies, right? Which is, again, the cause of so much suffering. Everything that we have that we want, eventually it fades away its validity, right? We've all experienced this, right? Either you run out, right? It's like you have a rasgulla, right? Or you have ras malai. For some people like ras malai more than rasgullas. I think they're just objectively wrong, right? And so people, no matter how much you eat it, eventually it'll fade away, right? Eventually you eat it and then you have to swallow it, and then you think, I wish I had more, right? That's everyone's first thought. After you finish a sweet, you think, where's the other one, right? Where's the next one? And if you keep getting more, eventually you get sick of the sweet, right? This is the cruelty of the material nature, right? And therefore, an intelligent person, he does not take part in them, right? He is not concerned with them. Sense gratification is foolish, right? And then again, we find Krishna consciousness, right? All of us chant, right? All of us have been chanting and singing in kirtan and listening in kirtan for so long. And has the Mahamantra got more boring, right? Have we gotten bored of it? Srila Prabhupada once said, he said, if you want to see the potency of the Mahamantra, chant Coca-Cola for one day instead of Hare Krishna, right? Chant Coca-Cola and see if you can chant it as much as you chant the Mahamantra. You can't, right? It's impossible. But how much nectar is there, right? Because spiritual life, it does not have a beginning and an end, because Krishna does not have a beginning and an end. Krishna's love for his devotees does not have a beginning and an end, and the love of the devotees for Krishna does not have a beginning and an end. There is no beginning and an end, and therefore there is genuine happiness in them, right? And there is only foolishness in trying to rejoice in the happiness of material sense objects. Again, that's not to say that we do not engage with the world, but we engage in the world in Krishna consciousness, right? The world becomes transformed from a source of misery to a source of joy, right? Because what is it said? The intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. But when we engage the world with spiritual senses, right, then the material world becomes a source of joy, right? So there we have it, right? I can think of the brahmacharis when they go in book distribution. Rejection is probably one of the roughest material experiences, right? But you see, they're just ecstatic when they go. People will say, go away, blah, 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 like that. And they're all just ecstatic, right? Even things which we explicitly identify as sources of suffering, they become happiness with our spiritual senses. Okay, so in this way we hear, right, sense enjoyment is foolishness. And this is reiterated by text 23. Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world, right? So this is basically saying what I was saying, right? Right? I think this is pretty straightforward. For the sake of time, I'm going to keep on going. We might go 5 minutes over time just in order to get this chapter done. If that's any issue, you are still, again, free to leave. Just please watch the recording, okay? So that's pretty much saying what we've already discussed. Now, text 24 says, in contrast to all of this, in contrast to this outward world, right, which when we delve into it materially, not connecting it to Krishna, gives us only suffering. There is an internal world, right? One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme, right? So one whose happiness is inward, antasukha, whose relish, right, is inwards, antararama, right? And whose sight is inward, antarjyoti, right? He is the perfect yogi, right? And he experiences Brahma Nirvana. Next week, I might discuss the use of the word nirvana in the Bhagavad-gītā. But for today, we'll skip over that. And so we find, if one is able to go within, right? Because who is within? The super soul within. If one is able to go within, or for the devotee, right? Krishna within. If one is able to go within into the spiritual nature of the soul which has that aspect of joy, which is inherently there to celebrate the joy of Krishna, is one is able to go there, go within, aim inward, then one is able to have that joy pour forward, right? And experience the world properly. When we experience the world first inward and then going outward, then we experience joy. That being said, that joy is not a joy that is inherently there by going inward, right? They say compared, our mind is a greater mystery than even the depths of the ocean, right? They say that, right? And that's only our mind. Our internal world is very, very large, right? We might see the world around us, and actually the world around us doesn't have much space for who we are. I'm sure we've all experienced that, right? The mystery of who we are is not accommodated in the world around us. So we have to go to the world inside of us. But the world inside of us is a bit like the desert, right? If I give you all the desert, will you all be happy? If I say, here is the Sahara Desert, Katyayani Mataji, if I said, here is the Sahara Desert and it is all for you on your own, would you be happy with it?
No, Prabhu.
No, right? But if I said, Katyayani Mataji, here is the desert and you'll have Srinivas Prabhu to be with it, to be sharing it with, suddenly then the desert doesn't seem so bad, right? The space itself is not valuable, but space when shared with people becomes valuable, right? So we go within, we go to the personal aspect, we go to personhood, right? Because outward there is space, but there are no persons. But inward there is space and there is also personality, right? And that inward space is one that we can share with the greatest personality and with all the devotees, to go back to Alex's point. So inwardly, there is true joy, there is true happiness. And when that true joy and happiness is shared, when that true joy and happiness is experienced, then it comes forth and suddenly the sense objects, suddenly they're enlivened, right? Because we've gone within and we've tasted that joy within. Again, there's so much more that can be said, but I do want to finish this chapter. So then we go on to the next text, and text 25 is interesting. Text 25 and 26 really conclude what we've discussed. And then, as I said, 27 to 29 start up chapter 6. So we won't discuss 27 to 29. We'll discuss them next week in order to segue into chapter 6. So 25 to 26 are now our final points, right? And they're building upon this point in 24, right? Because in this point, they're building upon this point in 23, right? What am I saying? They're building upon this point in 24, right? Because this point is saying that once one has experienced that within, param drishtva nivartate, we always come back to this point, right? That higher taste is experienced within. And when that higher taste is experienced within, then all of this is easy, right? And so 25, they discuss now, right? They discuss a process in order to encourage one. Because actually, this is rather discouraging stuff at times. You think, I will not reach this platform very soon. And so Prabhupada, very nicely, he said, ultimately, he attains the supreme, right? Can we all see that in the translation to text 24? Ultimately, he attains the supreme. What does this mean, right? Ultimately, attaining the supreme means that in order to reach the ultimate point, there is a distance to get there. So Srila Prabhupada is making the point. Don't be too hard on yourself, right? And then we come to text 25 and 26. 25, those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, they achieve liberation in the Supreme. Right? So this is the sadhana, this is the methodology, right? We must transcend the dualities that arise from doubts, right? Our mind should be engaged within the higher taste. We should always be busy working for the welfare of all the living beings, and we should be free from all sins. And therefore we should be, and therefore we can attain that highest goal, right? This is the means by which we can attain that goal. Now, the first two, they don't seem too difficult, right? The dualities that arise from doubts, I'm not sure if Abhishek Prabhu mentioned this, but the way that our acharyas define doubts is less about belief and more about faith. Often we hear doubts and we think about belief, right? We think, I doubt that this section of the Vedas actually historically happened, etc., etc., etc. That is a form of doubt, right? But it's not actually the main one that our acharyas focus on. The main one that our acharyas focus on is that we see this bhakti yoga process and we think, I will not attain something out of this, right? But if we have faith that yes, Srila Prabhupada, whatever Srila Prabhupada was experiencing, I want to experience that, right? And Srila Prabhupada has told me that by this process, I will attain that. If we have that firm faith, then we are not disturbed by doubts, right? No matter what other issues come up, we think this bhakti yoga process, this will give me the goal that I want, which is transcendental love for Godhead. This is the doubt that our acharyas mainly focus upon. So this is the doubt that should be transcended. And our minds should be engaged within, right? These are relatively straightforward. But the next ones, right? But the next one, that seems a little difficult, right? We're always engaged, right, in the welfare of all living beings and being free from all sins. I don't know about you guys, but I sin every day, you know what I mean? It's very hard not to, right? We are always engaged in really terrible activities, right? And I'll be honest, I barely work for my own welfare, let alone the welfare of anyone else, and let alone the welfare of all living beings, right? So this seems to be a rather difficult standard. And therefore, Krishna, right? He speaks the next verse in order to make the point that even though it's an ultimate destination, we should not be so worried, because those who are free from anger and all material desires, right, who are all self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future, right? So all of those people who are engaged in all of these things, in the very near future, it'll happen. So Krishna is speaking reassurance, don't be scared. And now this is the final point. We might think, well, I'm still scared. I still have anger and all material desires. I still feel, I'm not self-realized. I'm not self-disciplined, right? So how does this apply to me? And we must remember that in Krishna consciousness, all of these things come very quickly. One who is acting on the platform of bhakti, he is already self-realized, right? One who is absorbed in Krishna's beauty and pastimes, he is already self-disciplined because he is disciplined by the beauty of Krishna, drawing him away from any distraction, right? We remember in chapter 4, it said that just by hearing the pastimes of Krishna and understanding them fully, we become free from anger, fear, and all of these traps, right? So Krishna, he is implicitly making the point, simply by meditating on Krishna, simply about thinking about the beauty of Krishna, the all-attractive, naturally, we are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. So on that text, we rushed a bit, but we got up where I wanted to. We've basically concluded chapter 5, text 27 to 29. We will discuss them as we segue into chapter 6. So we've basically finished chapter 5, Hari Bol. Again, we did rush a bit, but I think chapter 5 is a little bit revision-y, unless we go in insane depth. So I was relatively comfortable to rush. On that note, we are nearly wrapping up this module, right? So we're getting very familiar with concepts like the yoga ladder, with concepts like renunciation of works. So I hope we're all getting rather comfortable with these topics. And then we'll have another 2 weeks. then we'll finish chapter 6, and then we'll have our test, and then we'll begin module 2. As I said, and I know a lot of other devotees think this as well, who have taught Bhakti-śāstrī, once you're past module 1, everything's easy from there. We're doing the more, I don't want to say dry, but it can feel dry a little bit, this section, right? Everything else is very apparent later. Okay, so homework is, I can't remember if I told Abhishek Prabhu to convey the homework to finish chapter 6. Have we all finished chapter 6? Okay, finish chapter 6, that's your homework. Okay, finish chapter 6. And the reason why I want you to finish chapter 6 is then for the next, after that, I won't give any homework, just learn your shlokas and practice for the closed book test. So that'll be the homework after you finish chapter 6, okay? Yep, so that's the homework. Are there any questions for anything we've discussed or anything that's coming up? Anything at all? Okay, well, if there's no questions, I'll hopefully see you all next week. Hopefully the floodings will get easier for everyone. I hope everyone hasn't been too harshly affected by the flooding. Yeah, and I'll see you all next week. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll have a little bit larger class again as the flooding sort of reside away. Okay, well, Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.